Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf Nun Gimel. We're going to start at the Mishnah at Nun Bet Amud Bet at the bottom. So today we're going to talk about the korbanot chatat and the korbanot olah and all the details about them. So chatat, okay, we've already done the chataot pnimiyot, the ones that are done, the blood is brought on the inner altar. Now on the sin offerings that are done on the regular altar, the regular typical sin offerings. So chataot tzibur v'hayachid. Now they break up into two categories, but the laws are the same for both in terms of what we're discussing, which is where is everything done. So they're both communal and individual. Individual we talked about many times. If you did something where intentionally you would get karet for it, but you did it b'shogeg, unwittingly, you bring a korban chatat. Eluhen chatot tzibur. So the chatot yachid are obvious. I don't need to tell you, but the chatot tzibur are sirei Rosh Chodesh v'shal moadot. Okay, the seirim, the goat offerings. If you remember, we talked about this many times. Seirim zimachad lechatat, right? That you bring the sin offerings on Rosh Chodesh, on the holidays, right, for Tumat Mikdash B'Kodashim. Remember, we had a whole thing, which Yidiot and all that, and Masechet Shvuot. Plus, we talked about this many other times. What are the rules? Well, it's part of kodshei kodashim. So, Shchitatam b'tzafon, Kibul Damam b'klei sharei b'tzafon. Remember, slaughter has to be in the north of the Azara, the accepting of the blood in a sanctified vessel in the north. V'daman ta'un, here goes the blood. This has a unique halacha by blood that doesn't exist by any other. Taman ta'un arba matanot al arba kranot. You need to do 4 placings on all 4 corners. Okay, today we're going to talk about these placings and how you do them. Remember, they're done with the kohen's finger, and it says in the Torah kranot, which doesn't appear anywhere else. Now, the olat ha'of has to be done also at the top, but it's a little bit different. We're going to see today. Okay, that's the korban burnt offering if you bring a bird. It's also done at the top of the altar, but it's done a little differently. Ketzad. So how do you, okay, so the kohen goes up the ramp, and then what does he do? Okay, so we're now going to get a play-by-play in the Mishnah of how the kohen walks and does the placings of the blood, although they're not going to get into enough detail, and for that we're going to have debates. Allah bakevesh, so goes up the ramp. Remember, the ramp is on the south. Okay, the mizbeach is at least toward the north, maybe in the north. We're going to talk about this today, where exactly it was centered on the south-north line. Okay, but right now he goes up for sure from the south. Now, when you're coming from the south, okay, on his right is going to be the east. On his left is going to be the west. So he's going to turn right, but he's not going to go all the way up the ramp to the top. Now, you would think if you have to put it on the 4 corners, what would you do? You climb to the top of the altar. Let's just talk. The altar was 9 cubits high. And the kranot, the horns of the mizbeach, jutted out 1 more amma. They were 1 amma by 1 amma length, width, and also height. So you would think that you would go all the way up to the top of the altar and put it around the 4 corners, kind of like the way the kohen does that we learned in the inner altar. Right now, the inner altar is the one in the heichal is much shorter than the kohen, and he stands above it and he puts on the 4 corners. This is a gigantic mizbeach. It's 32 cubits by 32 cubits, as opposed to 1 cubit by 1 cubit of the inner altar. And I forget the height. Maybe it was 5. No, I don't remember the height right now of the inner altar, but it was shorter than the kohen. Here you're at a very high, right? You're 10 cubits off the ground. Just to give you a sense, the average person's height is around 3 to 4 cubits. So you're talking a few heights of a person. They go up to the top of the altar. You would think they walk around, okay? But it says here, Allah bakevesh upanal sovev. He goes up the ramp, but there's smaller ramps on the sides, and he goes up the smaller ramp on the south side, basically on the right side of the, going alongside the ramp on the, I shouldn't say the south side, it's the east side of the going up the ramp, and takes that to, it's like a shortcut or like a little shorter ramp to get to the sovev. The sovev was at the midpoint height of the altar, and it was it was a ledge really that went all the way around all 4 sides of the altar. Okay, just to give you a sense of the proportions, thank you, Miriam. It was 2 cubits in height, the inner altar. That makes sense. If the average height of a person was 3 or 4, right? So this was 2, shorter than the kohen. Thank you. So now, if you take the altar was 28 by 28 cubits, but then it had the sovev that went around, which basically is a cubit of width, and it goes around all 4 sides. So that already adds another 2 cubits to 30 by 30. And then you have the yesod, which juts out on 2 sides, a cubit of width. So that's going to add it. We call it 32 by 32, even though you're missing the strip of the yesod on two sides. So it's not exactly, but if you take the outer dimensions of the altar and you draw a line for where it was missing. Today we're going to talk about why it was missing on those two sides. We'll finally get to that. We've been talking about the yesod. That's how we're going to end our daf. So it's 32 by 32. So you're now on this sovev, this sort of ledge that's on. Now, what's the purpose of this ledge? Exactly, if you want to do the blood on the upper part of the altar, when you did the blood on the bottom part of the altar for most of the sacrifices, the kohen stands on the floor, has the kli in his hand with the blood in it, and throws it onto the wall. And he just walks around, he's on the ground, okay? But if you need to get to the top, which is 9 or 10 cubits off the ground, right, the chronot, or 10 cubits off the ground, so you're going to need to stand at a taller spot, and you're going to go to this sovev, this ledge that's halfway, the midpoint, okay? It's I believe it's at the 5th cubit, okay? It's 5 cubits off the ground. So you basically got, and this is why I was thinking about the height of a person. The height of a person is 3 to 4 cubits. So if you're standing there, that gets you to 8 or 9, basically, right? And then if you can extend your hand, right, you can get all the way up to the Keren HaMizbeach. It doesn't seem like the easiest thing to be standing there and, okay. So anyway, that's the sovev. I want to just see if I can quickly double check that it's, or if someone wants to help me. I think it stood, I'm trying to figure out if it was at 5 and it got you to the 6th cubit, or it was actually at 5 cubits, the sovev. Okay, I can't look it up exactly right now, but it was around, right? The truth is it must have been at the 6th cubit mark, okay? Because I see this picture with the red line, which is in the midpoint, and then that's at 5 cubits, and then I think it was 1 amma above that. So it was at 6, and then you have basically 3 to get to, the bottom at least of the 10th cubit there where the Keren starts. So now thanks, a height of 6 amot. Okay, so thanks for clarifying. Okay, so you go up the ramp, and then panal sovev, and then you turn. Okay, you don't take the ramp up the whole way. You go off on this part in the mid ramp that basically takes you up on the smaller ramp to the sovev. Now, when you're on the south, right? You're walking from the south. I told you the mizrach is to your east. The east is to your right. That's what I meant to say. So, balo keren dromit mizrachit. So the first place you're going to go, okay, right, all the pinot that you go in the temple, you're always going to start right. So you go to the right. Then from there, so the first keren you get to is the dromit mizrachit, is the southeast. From there you go to mizrachit tzfonit, northeast. From there you go to tzfonit maravit, northwest. And you finish maravit dromit. Okay? Shiarei adam, now you're going to take the remainder of the blood, and where are you going to put it? Hayashafech al yesod dromit. Okay, what is yesod dromit? Remember the yesod was on the north side and the west side. So what's the yesod dromit? There is no yesod dromit. Well, if you remember, we talked about that the yesod was 32 cubits long, so it jutted out beyond the altar. Okay? So now, it jutted out toward the south side on the west, okay? It goes north to south on the west side. And there were 2 holes right there, okay? On the southwest corner, basically, of the altar. Remember, we said the one place where there's no yesod at all is the southeast. But on the southwest, there is a part of the yesod. It's just it doesn't go the whole length of the south side. It just juts out into the south. Now, there were 2 holes. Now, one of them was close. Okay, if you imagine... It's this 1 cubit wide long yesod. There were 2 holes, but one was closer to the west and one was closer to the south. They were a little on a diagonal from each other. So one is called the yesod maravi because in terms of if you're standing at the southwest corner, one is a little more, it depends, I guess, if you're facing the north, okay? So one is going to be a little more to your left, which is going to be toward the west, and one is going to be a little closer to you and a little toward the right of that one, which is going to be the south one. So you put it in the south one. Okay, now why does that make sense? Because when you finish at that part of the sovev, and then you're going to have to go down the ramp on the other side. That's why I said the ramp there were 2 small ramps coming out of the sovev. One was on the east side and one was on the west side of the ramp. Right? Because remember, the ramp goes from south to north, but it has sides to it. So the ramp, you would come down that other ramp, and the first place you would get to, if you walk toward the yesod, we're going to talk about this in the Gemara, is going to be the south one, because you're on the south side there. So you're going to end up closer to the south, as opposed to, remember, when you walked out of the the kodesh, from the sanctuary, if you remember, the first one you get to is going to be the west, because, right, and we saw there it said petach ol moed, which is the western part, because that's when you walk out, you're on the west side. Now again, both these holes were on the west side, but one was closer to the south and one was closer kind of to the petach ol moed. Okay, that all seems very clear, but soon we're going to say there's a whole machloket about that. Okay, we'll get there soon. So that was all a lot to say on that one line, which we're going to have a lot more to say. We get to the Gemara, the Shirei down the remainders of the blood, you go to the Yesod Dromit. Now, how do they get eaten? Where do they get eaten? So you eat it in the Azara. Okay, I want you to think about this Azara. What goes on in the Azara? You do the slaughtering, you do the accepting of the blood, you bring the blood to the altar, you do the burning of the altar. You don't really think about the Azara as a place where people sat and ate. Okay, I just want to remind you, there was a lot of things that you could only eat in the Azara, so it became a place where people ate also. It's interesting to just think about it. Now remember, it's also a courtyard. It's an open space. It's not like a closed room. The Heichal was closed. That had a little more of a feeling of sanctity to it. You think that was a sanctified place, but in a sense, it was like an open courtyard, and a lot of things were going on there. Anyway, that's the eating. So who eats it? Zichrei kiuna. The meat of the sin offerings goes to the male kohanim. We've seen this before. B'chol ma'achal, they can prepare it any way they want, as opposed to, right, the Pesach, which if you remember has to be roasted. But this meat you can prepare any way you want. Liyom v'layla al chatzot, and you have to eat it that day or that night, and you even only have till midnight. That we talked about before, because the rabbis limited anything you can do all night, limited it to midnight. So the Gemara starts off with the question, how do we do the blood? And how do we do the placings of the blood? Where exactly does it go? So we have a machlok at Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. Okay, Rabbi Elazar was the student of Rabbi Yochanan, rabbis in Israel. Chad amar noten ama elach v'ama elach. V'chad amar mechotev yored keneged chudosh al keren. Okay, I'm going to remind you. Kohen does this with his finger, not with the cup and throwing it. This is called a placing of the blood with the finger of the kohen. So he takes his finger. According to one of them, we don't know who says what. He puts it on the wall of the altar. And as remember, you're standing at the sovev. You're not standing by the keren. You're standing at the sovev. Now it said kranot. We would have thought that meant on the keren. According to this, you're standing at that 6 cubit height. You just have to put it anywhere on the wall there, as long as it's within a cubit of the corner. Okay? Which, by the way, means, I just want to point out, if it has to be on all 4 corners and all 4, that really also means all 4 sides. It means there has to be blood on the north side, blood on the east side, blood on the west side, blood on the south side. If you put it off the corner, according to this first opinion, it could be on an amah out of the way, then theoretically you're standing on the southeast corner. That's your first one. So while you're standing there, let's say you put it on the south side, right? You're either going to put it on one or the other if you could do that, right? If you end up putting it in amah from the corner, it's only going to end up on one side. So if you do that one on the south side, let's say, not the east side, then when you get to the next one, you're going to have to make sure, if you do it in amah away from the corner, and not exactly the benefit, if you do it on the corner, it gets on both sides. But if you do it away from the corner, then it only gets on one side. Well, then you're going to have to make sure that your next one is on the east. And then the next one, right, because it's going to affect, you want to, in the end, have it on all 4 walls besides by all 4 corners. So it doesn't say that in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, but it seems obvious from here that would be the case. So one says, Notena ma'elach v'ma'elach. As long as it's within a cubit of the corner, it's fine. The other one said, Mechate v'yored, you put your finger on there, and then you put your finger down until you use up all the blood. Keneged chudosh al keren. It has to be on that corner where the 2 sides meet, because then you get the blood in one motion on both sides. So we have this machloket. We're going to see in a minute this machloket. It has to do with some other machloket. Okay, and it's only within one opinion of a Tanaitic debate. These are Amoraim. They're debating an issue that soon we're going to learn. It has to do with an earlier debate. So that's what we're going to say right now. Aliva de Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon da Amal hi atzma eina na'aseit ela begufa shel keren. Now, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon holds, and in 2 or 3 minutes we're going to see his opinion inside. For whatever reason, they don't quote it yet. He says, it says on the kranot, you have to actually put it on the keren. Now, we didn't see that before, right? According to that, they're not having a machaloka within his opinion. According to his opinion, you have to put it in the corner, on not only just in the corner, but on the keren. Okay, it has to go on the keren itself. there's no machloket about that, because then obviously it has to go on that horn that's coming out of the, right? So there you have to reach up kind of higher to get to his opinion, because you're going to have to make sure you actually reach the keren. According to Rebbi, okay, kipliga liba de Rebbi. Rebbi, we're going to see, holds it just has to get on the wall anywhere above the chut hasikra. Now, when you say it has to get on the wall anywhere above that red line that marks that midpoint, which at this point, that's why you went to the sovev, because if we're going to put it up above, it's obviously going to be above the red line, because the sovev itself was above the red line. Then you're going to have this machloket. Okay, we're not putting it on the exact keren, the horn. It doesn't have to be anyway. But does it have to be in the corner, right? Like on the edge where it's on both sides like that? Or can it just be within a cubit of the corner? Okay, that's the debate within Rebbi. It's not within Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, because he says it has to be on the keren itself, so then there's no debate here. So within Rebbi, Mar Savar Ma Elach Vama Elach Keneged Keren. As long as it's one cubit within the keren, you're fine. Keneged Kerenu, Umar Savar Keneged Chudain Tfelo. And the other one said, no, it has to be really on the corner itself, right, where the two meet. Meitve. Now we're going to have a difficulty on one of these from a braita where it's stated explicitly like one of the opinions. So here it's a braita very parallel to our Mishnah, but you'll see a little difference. Chatot tzibor v'ayachid ketzam matan damam. How do you do the placing of the blood of the chatot, the sin offerings? Haya olela kevesh upana sovev. So starts off the same. You go up the ramp. You turn to go to the sovev. Ubalo lekeren dromit mizrachit. You get to the first corner. Tovel be'etzboa yamani. You take your right finger. We're getting a little more detail here. Hamiyumenet should be yamin, the one that's the better finger, meaning your index finger, it seems. Mid hadam shebemeslek. So you put it in the blood that's in the bowl, or the little vessel that they had. V'chomel begodalo milamalu be'etzboa ktana milamata. I tried to do this myself. You take your thumb and your pinky, and you use it to kind of smear the blood all the way, get it into one consolidated space. Okay? In other words, once you stick your finger in, the blood could be all over your finger. You want to push it using those other two fingers, push it forward so that all of it kind of is at the tip of your finger. Then, mechatev yored, here's the important part for our purposes, keneged chudash shel keren. Okay, you then put your finger on, right, take it downward in a downward motion, opposite the corner of the keren. Until you finish all the blood that's in your finger. And you do that on every single corner. So it seems very clear it has to be on that chod of the keren, on the edge of the corner, and not an amma there, an amma there. So how does the opinion that says it's okay to do an amma there, an amma there? Hasikra. This is the way they read it. Mitzvah bechuda. Ideally, you should do it on the corner. But if you happen to distance it from the corner within one cubit, that's still considered the corner. And that's how we resolve the difficulty. Okay, well, since we mentioned Rebbi and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Gemara asks, my Rebbi, my Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, right? Where do you see their opinion? What is their opinion? Based on Detanya. Here's the braita. Damim elyonim nitanim michut hasikra u'lamala. Okay, so the bloods on that are supposed to go above have to go above that chut hasikra, that demarcating line. Damim atachtonim nitanim michut hasikra u'lamatan. And the bloods that go on the lower part of the altar are anywhere, as long as they get anywhere underneath that red line. Divrei Rebbi. Okay, so there you have it. It doesn't have to be on the keren. As long as it's above or below, that's fine. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer, that's only ba'olat ha'of. Remember I said there's two sacrifices that need to have blood on the top. There's the sin offerings and the bird burnt offering. Now the bird burnt offering is at the top, but that doesn't have to be specifically, it doesn't say on the kranot. But what we saw for the sin offering in the psukim, it says it has to be on the kranot. Aval b'chatat behema, so because it says kranot, it has to be on the keren itself. Okay, so there's the machloket that we saw. So now Amar Rabbi Avau, my time of the Rebbi. Where does Rebbi get his opinion from? That it could be anywhere, right? It could be on the wall. It doesn't have to be specifically on the corner. So my time of the Rebbi, right? It doesn't have to be on on the horn itself. How do we get that it doesn't have to be on the horn? And it just can be done on the wall below the horn, which again, within Rebbi, there's a machloket. Does it have to be exactly on the corner, or right where the two walls meet, or can it be on the side as long as it's within a cubit? But the main thing he says right now, without getting into that machloket, is it doesn't have to be on the keren itself. So where do we get this from? Well, it comes from a pasuk in Yechezkel, D'chtiv, Yechezkel 43:15, V'ha'harel, which is the Mizbeach, Arba Amot, U'me'arel u'lamala ha'kranot Arba. And from the Mizbeach and up, the kranot are 4 cubits. So the Gemara asks, Arba Amodu Tahavya, the kranot are 4 cubits? No, they're not. Amrav Adabar Ava Mikom Kranot Arba. The space the kranot take up is 4. Now, if you think about this, so each keren is 1 by 1, so times that by 4, you get to the space is 4. But usually when they say 4, they mean 4 by 4. So the Gemara says, Makom Kranot Arba Havya? No, it's either 1 by 4 or really 2 by 2 if you call it, right? If you take 1 by 1, 1 by 1, 1 by 1, 1 by 1, and you put them all 4 in a square, you're going to get a 2 by 2 area. So it's not really 4 cubits. So what's this 4 cubits? El'ema reshut kranot arba. The space where we call kranot is 4 cubits. What are we talking about? 4 cubits downward. In other words, you have a space from 10 to 6 cubits, right? From 6 to 10 cubits of where you can, when you're standing at the sovev, you're at 6 cubits and you have 4 cubits worth of space where you could theoretically put the blood that's supposed to go on the corner. It will still be considered on the horns of the altar or on the corner of the altar. So this word keren is tricky. It's sort of horn, which is the part that's sticking out, but it's also really the corner and that area above the chut hasikra and really from the sovev and going up. Okay, that was where we got Rebbi's opinion. Now we're going to quote a Mishnah in Midot. T'nanatam. We're going to talk about the chut hasikra, okay, which they take as a given. There was chut hasikra. Now the Gemara is going to say chut hasikra chogro ba'emtza lavdil ben damim elyonim ledamim atachtonim. So the Mishnah in Midot, it's a Masechet we're going to get to in kodshim. Okay, it's all about the measurements of the temple. So right now we're kind of talking about them. There we really get it head on. It says there was this chut hasikra, this red line that went in the mid-height of the altar to differentiate. That's why it was there. Differentiate between bloods that need to go above and bloods that need to go below. Menani, how do we know there was such a thing? Rav Acha bar Rav Katina shenemar v'ayta hareshet ad chatzi hamizbeach. Okay, this is we talked about the michbal, right? There was the nartato to tachak, the karkov hamizbeach milamata. V'ayta reshet ad chatzi hamizbeach. So underneath the karkov, there was this reshet, this copper reshet. How do you call it? Like a netting kind of design that was basically at the midpoint of the altar. And so in the Torah it was described in that way, but in the second temple, or probably maybe first temple, they had it with this red line. Okay, right. Mainly we're talking about second temple period. It was a red line that demarcated. I assume they did it red because it was very easy to notice. Shayarei hadam. Okay, now that was all about the placings of the blood on the corners. Now we need to get to the remainder of the blood. So the remainder of the blood, as we said, goes in the south hole. Okay, we'll call it the south hole because it's not exactly the south side, but again, there were these 2 holes, a little on a diagonal from each other. One was more to the west, one was more to the south. They were both on the western yesod. So Shayarei Adam, Tanu Rabbanan, El Yesod et Mizbeach, Ze Yesod Dromi. Okay, so the braita, classic Midrash Halakha, says, from this pasuk you get to, this is it. Now, it wasn't really clear from the pasuk, and the braita is going to continue and say, Ata omer ze Yesod Dromi. Are you sure it's Yesod Dromi? O eno ela Yesod Maravi. Maybe it's on the western side. And why would we think more likely it would be on the western one? Because Yilmad Satumin Meforash. We have, when it talks about, okay, where are we quoting? By the way, we're quoting from the Seir of the Nasi, which is the individual, which is a sin offering done on the outer altar. Now, when it came to the inner altar, it said specifically, you do it in Yesod HaMizbeach, El Petach O El Moed, right? Here it just says El Yesod HaMizbeach, right? They both said Mizbach HaOlah. Okay, we had a whole drush on it. And then here it just says El Yesod HaMizbach HaOlah, and it doesn't say anything else. So there's a classic way of determining what it is. If something says explicitly and something is missing somewhere else, right? The same pasuk, but it just doesn't have it. We assume you learn what it says elsewhere to here. So why not? That's Satumin Meforash. Somewhere where it's not said, you're going to learn from somewhere where it's explicitly stated. So wouldn't you just say, there we learned that it's west, because it's right outside Ol Moed, which would be the west one. And therefore here also. So why are you saying it's south? So the braita continues, this Midrash Halakha, Amalta, Gilmad Yeridato min hakevesh liyetziato min ha'echal. Well, you could learn Satumin Meforash, but in a different way. The way you leave the hechal, right? The way you go down the ramp, when you go down the ramp to then sprinkle the blood, it's to pour the blood. It's like when you leave the heichal, the sanctuary. How so? And this is what I mentioned when we read the Mishnah. When you get out of the heichal, you go to the first place you see, which is the western one. And after you read the Tomen HaKevesh, when you go down the ramp and you're on the south side, you're going to do the first one you get to, which is going to be the south one. Okay, b'samuchlo. So there we have an explanation of our Mishnah. But to confuse you a little bit, we're now going to bring a braita with two different opinions. Okay, Tanya, Rabbi Ishmael Omer. Okay, we're going to end up having three. Right now we're of the opinion the inner ones go on the west and the outer ones go on the south. But the braita says that Rabbi Ishmael Omer, Zeh v'zeh Yisov Maravi. They both go on the west, both the ones that go on the inner altar in the sanctuary and also the ones that go on the outer altar, which are these sin offerings we're talking about. And Rabbi Shimon ben Yochanan, which obviously, how does he learn that? Satum and Meforash, because that one says it and this one doesn't. Let's say the same thing is true. And Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, remember who says what? Okay, Rabbi Ishmael is the one who says Zeh v'zeh Maravi. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Zeh v'zeh Yisod Dromi. They're both in the south. Okay, so Bishlama, it's obvious, we can understand very easily Lamanda Amar Yisod Maravi. Kasavar, Yomad Satum and Meforash. But Lamanda Amar Yisod Maravi, my time. But why would you say they're both in the south? We already learned when we did the Chataot Pnimiyot. You walk out, what's the first one you're going to see? The west one. So how'd you get to the south one? Okay, so what's the answer? Rabbi Asi, Kasavar Haitana, this Tana held, I told you we were going to talk about this today, Kule Mizbech B'Tzafon Kai. Or Lishana Achrina Kula Petach B'Daron Kai. Okay, these both mean the same thing, but I'll explain the words. But where was the Mizbech situated? On the north-south line of the room, okay? So now, the ramp was for sure in the south, but was that it? And was the Mizbech already, when we get to the part of the altar, when you go up the ramp and you're at the altar, was that already situated on the north side? Now, if that's situated on the north, what does that mean? Okay, and Rashi has two explanations of where exactly. Could be even, it was more, like maybe some of the ramp was even in the north already. Then when you walk out of Petach Ol Moed, what's the first thing you're going to see? The south part of the Yisod, because the western part is a little more toward the north of the room, and you're in the middle of the room. So if the whole Mizbech is situated on the north side, the base, again, the Mizbech meaning the 32 by 32 cubits, right? In addition, there's the ramp, which is another 32 cubits long. The ramp is obviously on the south side. But so where in the room this Mizbech is, there's a whole debate. We're going to get to this in the beginning of the next chapter, so we'll deal with it then. The different opinions about where it is. But if you put the whole thing in the north, then you actually, when you walk out, okay, especially if it's a little more to the north than centered, when you walk out of this heichal, which is mamash the midpoint of the room, you're actually going to get to the base of the altar on the south side, okay, the southernmost tip of it. So that's going to be the first place you hit if you hold that way. And that's why he says, even, okay, different from what we saw in the Mishnah, the Chataot Pnimiyot you actually do on the south one. In that hole you pour them into, and therefore, you're going to say the same thing for us. So that's Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Turning now to Amud Bet. Remember, Rabbi Ishmael said everything in the west, and Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai said everything in the south. But Tana debate Rabbi Ishmael in the house of Rabbi Ishmael, they taught. It says ki Rabbi, but it means it really should be bi Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, meaning they taught. You can look at Rashi, changes the nusach to bi. They taught in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. So now we have Rabbi Ishmael's students who's quoted Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai as saying, Omrim Zeh v'zeh Yisod Maravi. He actually held what Rabbi Ishmael held. Okay, v'simanech, and here's how you remember it: Mashchu Gavre LaGavra. The many pulled the one. Okay, because the students of Rabbi Ishmael pulled Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai to their side, and he changed his mind about it and said, "Fine, you're right. It really is on the Maravi." So we start with these three opinions. We started with the one opinion. There's a difference between the Chataot Pnimiyot and Chitzoniyot. That one's done on the right, because that's where, the when you get out, that's done on the west, because that's where you get to first. And when you go down the ramp, when you're in the outer altar, it goes to the south, because that's where you get to first. And that's what appears in our Mishnayot. But we saw in the Gemara, there were two other opinions. Both are in the south, or both are in the west. In the end, the one who said both are in the south got pulled to the side to say both are in the west. Okay, and changed his mind. So we start with three different opinions. We end up really with two. Okay, moving to the next Mishnah. Ola. Now we're talking about burnt offerings. And already there's going to be a difference in this Mishnah because until now, we've been mentioning in the Mishnah how the meat is eaten, who eats it. Obviously in the Ola, everything is burnt. There's no meat to eat. So there's going to be a little bit of a difference. And the other difference is right now the Mishnah starts off and says, Ha'ola kodshei. Now that's a little bit weird because in none of the other Mishnayot did they say this is kodshei, right? We started with this topic sentence, right? Kodshei shchitatam b'tzafon. And then it went into all the different kodshei, but it didn't say this is kodshei. Here the Mishnah does, and the first question of the Gemara is going to be, why did you add the words kodshei here? Shchitatam b'tzafon. Okay, so you slaughter it in the north, same as all the others. Kibul damam b'klei b'tzafon. You collect the blood in a sanctified vessel in the north. V'damat ta'un shtei matanot she'en arba. And the blood requires 2 placings, which is 4. I'm going to explain why this is and how we do it. You need to first take off the hide, then cut it into pieces before you burn it, and then the entire animal is completely burned. Okay, it's not burnt whole. Right? You put it on the altar in pieces. Ola, so the Gemara starts off. My time atane kodshei. Why did it say kodshei? Mishum de lo ktiv ba kodshei kodashim. Because the one sacrifice in the Torah that's kodshei that doesn't say in the Torah it's kodshei. Remember by the Chatat and the Ashram we saw it was kodshei. One of those questions we had about can you learn this from that? Remember we said if you could just learn the Zera Shava after a hekesh and you'd have been able to learn kodshei appears by Chatat, kodshei appears by Hasham. Notice they didn't say you could have done a Zera Shava to the Ola with kodshei because it doesn't say kodshei by Ola. So that's why there was no option of Zera Shava there. So now, because remember, Ola's learned directly. That would have worked then. It just would have been a simple Gzera Shava without a Gzera Shava on and something learned by a Hekesh. Okay, if you don't remember all that, don't worry. That was just a review. So now, it doesn't say kodshei, so the Mishnah, there's an interesting thing. The Mishnah wants to kind of fill in with, some things that are missing in the Torah. Let's just put it straight out there. This is kodshei. Even though it's kind of obvious it's kodshei, because obviously it's high-level sanctity, because the whole thing is burned. In general, lower level sanctity means you can eat the meat, right? The owner can eat the meat, and obviously no one can eat the meat here. Now we're back to like we had in the last sugya, which was how do we do the blood exactly? So now we're going to try to explain. And again, we're going to have a machloket. So 2 placings on 4 corners. On 4 sides. How are you going to get that? Well, Amarav, notain, v'chozer v'notain. You stand at the bottom. Okay, so let's say you start at that southeast corner, and you're going to, let's assume, okay, here you're not actually walking up the mizbeach where you get, you're on the south side, but whatever. Let's assume you start there, and you throw the blood on the wall. Okay, now when you throw the blood on the wall, you throw it, let's say, on the south side. So then you throw it on the south side, and then you turn, you're at that same corner. You could probably even be in the same position, and then you throw it onto the east wall. Okay, and that's how you get. It's really 2 throws each time. So you're really going to end up with 4 throws, but it's called 2 placings because you're only doing it from 2 sides. Okay, you're doing it on the, actually that was a big mistake that I said southeast because you're definitely not going to do it on the southeast because that's the one corner that doesn't have a base. So sorry that I said that. It would be the first one you would get to, but you can't do it there. So you're going to go actually to the where you're actually going to do the sprinklings is very clear. You're going to do it on the northeast corner and on the southwest corner. Those are 2 complete opposite each other, and that's how you're going to get to all 4 sides, because while you're on the northeast, you're going to get the north and the east, and while you're on the southwest, you're going to get the south and the west. Okay? So, and we're going to see that's why you do it on 2, because you can't do it on the southeast corner. So once you can't do it on the southeast corner, right, we're not going to have you do 3 that are 4. We're going to do, right, it makes more sense, 2 that are 4. Each 2 you do it at, right, you're going to get all 4 walls. So according to Rav, you kind of do 2 in one spot. So you do 1 and then the other. Shmuel amar matana achat kimin gama notain. So Shmuel says it's 4. Yes, this is shtayim shem arba. If that's what you're asking, that's exactly right. That's what the Mishnah says. Shtei matanot shem arba. That's what we call it. So now Shmuel, but then it's really, really 4 because each of the 2, right? Each time you're at one of those 2, you're actually doing 2. But we call it still shtayim shem arba because you're really standing in 2 spots and doing them like that. Shmuel says, matana achat, you only do 1. And then it really is shtayim shem arba because you do 1 at the northeast and 1 at the southwest. And how do you do it? Like a gamma. Gamma is a Greek letter, and it looks like a chaf sofit. Okay, like a right angle kind of thing. You do one and the other, right? So if you draw a line, right, horizontally, you have a line here going from on the north side, and then the same line going on the west side, on the east side, and then you've done the northeast. Okay, so you throw it. Now it's obviously not going to come out like a very nice line because you're throwing blood, but you're going to get it on both sides. Why did they say a gamma? Because it has a right angle, right? The mizbeach has a right angle here, so it's like you're throwing it at a right angle. You're getting it on both, around the corner there. And now they're going to point out this machloket Rav and Shmuel is actually based on a machloket Tanaim. Kitanai. Yachol yizrakenu zrika chat. You might have thought you just throw it one throw. Talmud lomar saviv. But it says, okay, let's read the pasuk. It says in the Ola, Vayikra Aleph pasuk chet, V'shachatit ben bakar lefnei Hashem, slaughter the ben bakar before God. Hikrivu b'nei Aaron kohanim et hadam. They bring the blood. Remember we said that's bringing it. That's the holacha, or Kabbalah, I think. Kabbalah and holacha. V'zarku et hadam ala mizbeach saviv. And then they throw the blood on the altar all around. So now it's a little tricky. Throwing sounds like one action. All around sounds like you have to go all around. So, if you might think it's one zrika, it says saviv. On the other hand, if you say saviv, yachol yikifenu kechut, it sounds like maybe you have to walk around and just keep going in a line and get it around the entire mizbeach. So, Talmud lomar v'zarkut. They say, no, you just throw it. So, how do you resolve both those things? How do you find a middle position? Ha-ketzad kimin gama. So, you do it like a gama, you throw it. So, it goes on two sides. Shtei matanot she'en arba. Okay, and you do it twice, and that's how you get around, but you also get by throwing. Okay, that's how we rectify it. That's one opinion, which matches Shmuel. Second opinion in this braita, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, ne'amar kan saviv, v'ne'amar lahalan saviv. It says saviv here, and it says saviv in the korban shlamim. It says there, v'zarku b'nei Aaron kohanim et hadam al mizbeach saviv. Ma lahalan pisuk v'arba matanot. There you stop in between each one and you do 4. Afkam pisuk va'arba matanot. Okay, so there you do 4 separate matanot. So here you also have to do 4 separate matanot, which is why Rav says you have to do it, right, one and then the other, right, in each spot. So they say, wait a minute, but ima lahalan arba matanot al arba karnot, but there you have to do 4 on all 4 sides. You don't do 2 that are 4, you do 4 that are 4, okay, 1 on each side. So afkam arba matanot al arba karnot. So they say no. There's an issue here. We really, ideally, let's say, we would learn it from the shlamim that you would do 4. We haven't gotten to the shlamim yet, but we'll get there soon. That you do 1 on each corner, on each side. Okay, but right, not the corner at the top, but on the sides. But the problem is, based on the sugya we already learned, ola tu'una yesod. The ola blood needs to be sprinkled where there's a base. Now, what's the problem? There's no base on that southeast corner. So you can't go to all 4 sides because there's no base underneath. The Kerem Mizrachi Drumi Lo Hayali Yesod, right? The southeast corner didn't have a base. So you can't do that. So therefore, we do 4, but we do 2 in one corner and 2 in the other corner. And that is Rabbi Shmuel's position, which Rav is based on. So this machloket Rav and Shmuel, we now saw in a Tanaitic debate. Now we finally get to my time. Why was there no Yesod in the southeast corner? And this is where we'll end our daf. Amar Rabbi Elazar lefisha lo hayta b'cholko shel toref. It wasn't in the nachala. It wasn't in the okay, I'm blanking on my words. Where Binyamin's tribe, the portion. It wasn't in the portion, thank you, of Binyamin. Okay, so wasn't in the portion of the toref. Binyamin ze'ev yitrof. So that's why they call him the toref, from the bracha for Binyamin. Anyway, it says it wasn't in Binyamin's portion. And it says that Binyamin, okay, you can look in Rashi for a minute. Rashi says, Shinabeya, okay, Binyamin dichtiv ze'ev yitraf in Breshit. This is in Vayichi. Okay, Shinabeya kovalav, baboka yochal ad. And the way they translate it, ba'achsante yit b'nei midbacha. In his shetach, the mizbeach will be built. And this wasn't in his portion. So, okay, the line, we're going to see this in a minute now, that those 2 lines, or at least the way Rashi explains it, the 2 strips where the yesod was supposed to be all around, was in the shetach of Yehudan. You couldn't build the mizbeach there based on the way they understood the bracha of Yaakov. So, basically, we had a problem. Okay, to Amar of Shmuel. So that's why they didn't build it there. Okay, now we understand why it was built in such a weird way. There was only two sides. To Amar of Shmuel bar of Yitzchak, Mizbeach ochel b'chol kosher Yehuda Amah. Okay, the Mizbeach juts out into the Shetach of Yehuda 1 cubit. Okay, and that's this last cubit where the Yesod was. So they just didn't build it there. Amar Rabbi Levi bar Chama, Amar Rabbi Chama bar Rabbi Chanina, Ritzu'ah hita yotzah michalka shel Yehuda v'nechnesa b'chol kosher Binyamin. There was this strip of the Nachal of Yehuda that kind of jutted into the portion of Binyamin, and according to Rashi, it was a strip. Okay, there's a picture in the actual Gemara in Rashi. Rashi probably didn't write this diagram, but somebody added it here, where you see there's a strip where the Yesod should be on those other two sides, a strip that's 1 amma wide, but it goes the whole length of the Mizbeach, strip there and strip there on the south side and on the east side, which was part of Yehuda's Shetach. Binyamin was very sad about this for all of his life, and was upset that this was going to happen. Okay, this is a drasha of the psukim in Dvarim, in V'zot Bracha, when we have the brachot of Moshe to the tribes. It says about Binyamin, okay, Yedid Hashem Yishkon lebetach alav, chofef alav kol hayom, uben ktefav shachin. So now we're going to darshan in the second part of this pasuk. We're a little bit into tomorrow's daf, but we'll just finish it. Chofef alav kol hayom, Rashi says, like a nazir chofef umefasfes. Okay, that's what they say this means is Adam mechashev v'doeg. Okay, it's like a person who's always thinking about it. Binyamin became obsessive about it. They would always be thinking about this. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? So we're going to see this was viewed as a good thing. Because if they didn't care, this is a good thing. If you care and you feel the loss, then you might get rewarded for that. If they didn't care, then nothing would have happened. But because chofef alav kol hayom, that explains the next part of the pasuk. Lefichach zacha Binyamin atzadik v'nasa ushbizchin lakadosh baruch hu shene'amar uben ktefav shachem. Ben ktefav shachem means God will dwell in his between his shoulders. What does that mean? In the Shetach of Binyamin will be the dwelling of God's presence. That's why the kodashim. That's why Binyamin was zoched, that it was considered the property of Binyamin. It was in the Nachalah, the portion of Binyamin. That was a reward for the fact that they were upset. They were losing this small part that could have been part of the Mizbeach, and on account of that, Binyamin got rewarded that he got them in a mikdash. Okay, it's the kodesh kodashim. It's obviously the drash here, right? Binyamin, it means he saw Baruch HaKodesh, that this was going to be in the future, was upset about it, and because of that, got rewarded. And with that, we finished today's daf. So what do we have? We did the ola, the chatat, and then the ola, and we saw again the chatat that's done on the outer altar, and we saw where the blood is put, specifically, on what corners, and how it's done on all the corners, how it's done on the corners. We saw a debate and then a debate within a debate. Okay, it's have to be on the carrying itself or just on the wall above the chut hasikra. And remember, they do it while they're walking on the sovev. And then within that, it doesn't have to be on the carrying itself, on that horn that's jutting out. We had a debate. Could it be just on the wall next to it, or does it have to be specifically where the two walls meet, so that really it gets on both sides when you do it? And because it says Karen, maybe it means on the corner there specifically. Then we got to so the source for the opinion that it could be 4 amot going downward, that you can extend that extension. We talked about the chut hasikra, what the source for it was, and then we had this whole 3-way machloket about the blood of the remainder of the blood. Does it go on the south? Does it go on the west? And what's the relationship between the remainder of the blood? Is it the same as the same place where the ones that when you come out of the heichal from the inner ones, or is it different? And if it's the same, which one? We had all 3 opinions there. Then we got to the ola, and we talked about what shtei matanoche and arba is machloket, both between Rav and Shmuel, which is based on the machloket tanaim, about do you do 2 placements on each corner, one on this side, one on that side, or do you do one which gets on both sides? Okay, and then we finished up with the whole issue of why it's on 2 and why you don't go to all 4, and that was based on the fact that there's no yesod there, and it has to be where there's a yesod, and then why was there no yesod? And with that we finished. Wishing everyone a good day.